100 Days of Horror and Neglecting Tigray. For those watching closely, the immediate signal to the Ethiopian war of aggression against Tigray literally came in the resolution proposed on October 3 by the illegal parliament just after security forces brutally massacred scores of civilians in the western Wallagga zone of the Oromia regional state. 100 days since the start of the genocidal war on Tigray, it's become clear that the Wallagga massacre was carried out by an Amhara militia loyal to the Ethiopian Prime Minister, just in order to set a criminal case accusing the government of Tigray as a perpetrator. Nevertheless, that didn't go well for the Prime Minister at the beginning, because the incidents exposed his dangerous game theory, making him look impotent in the eyes of his radical supporters and incapable in the sight of the victims. However, only few knew that the massacres that characterized much of the so-called change era were engineered by the Prime Minister himself. As he addressed the parliament, he was received with mixed feelings, unlike any other time before. Some members of the parliament openly launched a campaign to save his deteriorating support base, implicating the government of Tigray and OLF as perpetrators of the Wallagga violence. Simultaneously, some called for the designation of the lawfully elected government of Tigray as a terrorist, just to set a precondition for what later came to be seen as devastating war. Listen to this.
EPLF, just like Isayas, and also the Nigerian Boko Haram and the Somali Al-Shabaab, why is it that we have not yet designated it as a terrorist organization?
Contrasting this, a handful of other MEPs remarked to indict the unelected Prime Minister and his security officials for government failure observed in Abiy Ahmed's administration. Abiy Ahmed's war drums were met with critical confrontation from certain MEPs who, contrary to his blame game, suspected his administration was responsible for the mushrooming violence that dominated the post-PRDF era. The MEPs further suggested to indict the unelected commander-in-chief himself, his army officials, and security authorities for the government's mishandling of the nation's security. This exactly accelerated his war plan, and on the night of November 4, he announced that he has ordered his armed forces to annex Tigray by force. Under normal circumstances, only the House of People's Representative of the Federation had the mandate to declare war. This literally means the Constitution doesn't bestow power to the illegal Prime Minister to wage war against one or more members of the Federation. To observe the constitutional order, one of the two conditions have to be met, either a request from the government of Tigray or an authorization of the federal parliament. Nevertheless, Abiy Ahmed, who was receiving orders from the Eritrean dictator Isayas Afeworki and the Emirati regime, refused to abide by the constitutional limits of his power and recklessly declared an all-out war on Tigray at the night of November 4. In a televised speech on November 4, Abiy Ahmed Ali pressed the Ethiopian people, expressing that 2 cargo aircrafts were sent to Mekelle to deliver 1.3 billion birr to local banks in Tigray. In a dramatized development, unusual military movements were observed near the airport at the same moment. Here we should highlight that Abiy Ahmed had lost confidence on the loyalty of the Northern Command of ENDF, an armed wing which questioned the Prime Minister's secretive deals with the Eritrean dictator Isayas Afeworki. His recent reshuffling of the army and plans to downsize the Northern Command clearly show Abiy's level of frustration. It's also important to take into account that the largest segment of the armed forces of the Northern Command were unhappy with the unjustified closure of the borders with Eritrea. What happened on November 4 is exactly an escalation of Abiy's uneasy relationship with the command base. Having put every option in line, such as The huge military buildup that was taking place for several months in all parts of northern Tigray, the establishment of the new Northwestern command base in Bahir, and Abiy Ahmed's unusual visit to the notorious Eritrean conscription center Sawa indicated that Abiy's military maneuver on November 4 was meant to bring down the mighty Northern Command. In a matter of hours after the aircrafts landed in Mekelle airport, situations changed dramatically, and the Ethiopian Defense Forces opened fire on Tigray security forces in different parts of Mekelle. In a matter of days, the world observed Emirati drones pounding civilian and military targets indiscriminately. Evidences have revealed that civilian infrastructures and unarmed people, consisting of universities, religious institutions, cultural sites, and industries, were destroyed with Emirati UAVs. Although the Tigrayan Defense Forces avoided fighting near populated areas and cities to minimize civilian casualties, reports showed that the Ethiopian and Eritrean forces bombed all Tigrayan cities and deliberately destroyed public and civilian targets. Some reports revealed that the aircraft that Abiy indicated to have landed in Mekelle came to deploy about 500 Special Commando paratroopers who subsequently overran Mekelle and Labanega Airport and then marched to Tigray presidential headquarters and tried to stretch their holdings towards the Martyrs Monument, where the DW International TV station and the TPLF headquarters are located. But before the Ethiopian regime set out its provocation, eyewitnesses confirmed that Abiy's main target was the Northern Command base, not just Tigrayan authorities. Simultaneously, another contingent of special commanders attacked the military base of the Ethiopian Army Northern Command near the airport, but quickly neutralized by the swift responses from the Tigrayan Defense Forces. Soon, the once peaceful Tigray morphed into a restive urban battlefield immediately as Abiy Ahmed announced the full-scale aggression against Tigray and disrupted all forms of communication, internet, electric power, and supplies. The Ethiopian Prime Minister called the annexation of Tigray a law and order enforcement campaign. An official reason Abiy Ahmed only told the world for his military strike on Tigray. Officials of the Ethiopian Federal Authority said that the campaign was surgical, and rumors that the focus of the attack was the Tigrayan administration were baseless. In several interviews, the Prime Minister, the Army Chief of Staff, and the spokesperson of the Provisional State of Emergency Coordination Office indicated that their targets were only a handful of members of the TPLF and no more, no less. This allegation proved to be false as he ravaged the entire Tigray with drones enlisted from UAE and with full-scale involvement of the Eritrean forces. Abiy Ahmed chose these targets for two purposes. By removing the lawfully elected government of Tigray, he wanted to humiliate the people of Tigray and hold back Tigray people's hopes for a future of peace and security. The other reason was to undermine the people's right for self-determination and self-governance. His attack on the national airport and the headquarters of the Northern Command revealed his intention to foment sectarian violence within the army and turn Tigray into an earthly Armageddon. In this respect, I should say that the Ethiopian Prime Minister invited the Eritrean president with a request to join him in his vengeance war with Tigray. Therefore, the flaring up of the conflict shortly escalated into a level of regional war as Eritrea quickly mobilized its forces from the north and internationalized with the involvement of Emirati drones. This situation created an unprecedented shock on the people and the less equipped Tigrayan forces vis-à-vis the huge Ethiopian and Eritrean army with their sophisticated military arsenal such as the Emirati UAV. As a result, the people has been trapped for over 100 difficult days in the busy Tigray as the forces of Abiy Ahmed Ali, Eritrea, and the Emirati drones brutally devastated their life. The war is still going on in many fronts, and the youth are brutally slaughtered by the invading forces. Women are also forced to choose between rape and death. To make people's atrocities worse, the international community has shown no interest to stop the shocking war crime that is happening inside Tigray. We've been hearing world leaders expressing concerns, but their actions appear to be self-defeating. Through their inaction, world leaders, the UN, the EU, the African Union, and IGAD are giving approval to commit more horrific crimes in Tigray. But here is one thing. As Ethiopia and Eritrea fall much deeper into the Tigrayan war quagmire, the world is risking a return into a chaotic beginning once the war in Tigray gets out of touch. Thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and like.